It's a great book, so I'm sure it'll be great.
Does anyone want any more wine or water before we get started? We have this wonderful Israeli wine. Anyone want? You can raise your hand. Would you like some red wine?
Some water.
Water? Isabel, do you want those? So, welcome everyone to Baxter Street at the Camera Club of New York. Don't know how much you guys know about the organization. We have been around for 132 years this year. We're one of the oldest arts organizations in New York City, and our mission is to support emerging lens-based artists. So to that end, we have a workspace residency program that Inbal was a part of in 2015, and the residents get access to workspace for 3 months, and then they get to have a solo show here, which is really wonderful for us to get to see the progression of the residents. And in addition to that, we have a lot of different programming. We have the Conversations Series, which is what you guys will be experiencing today. And then we have classes, we have a guest blog, we have a guest curated exhibition program as well. And we have membership. So if you want to print in a darkroom or you are interested in scanning, talk to me later, and we have different levels of support membership as well. So my name is Libby. Feel free to ask me any questions. Also, if you want more wine or water, I or Isabella can help you with that. So without further ado, I will let you guys.
Okay. Hi, I'm Alan Frame, and I'm on the board, and I've been involved with this space for a long time. We moved here a little over a year ago from Midtown. We gave up our darkroom, started a relationship with ICP so that our members can use their darkrooms at a very affordable price. And we do these exhibitions, and I keep running into people who think that we do members exhibitions. So I'm just going to say we don't. We show people who are not members. And part of it, Inbal is having this show because, as Libby said, she was one of the 4 people who were chosen by a jury to participate in the workspace residency. And then they get a solo show the following year. In addition to that, we have guest curated exhibitions, which could be solo or group. The next exhibition is a solo guest curated exhibition of the work of Robert Marshall, who's sitting in the back, who is a painter, writer, and photographer. And it's going to be a gorgeous show, and with a catalog as well. Speaking of catalogs, there's a catalog for this show. I think it's essential. It has a whole other dimension that it brings to the work, and we're going to talk about it as a panel. But you're free to take one, and thank you all for coming. So there are a couple seats up here, and Mark and Robert, if you can't hear any of us at any point, since we're not mic'd, just give us a signal. So let me introduce the panel. Well, here's the artist, Inbal Abergil. Next of kin is an ongoing project. Inbal is from Israel. She did her MFA at Columbia. She now teaches photography in New York at Pace and Columbia, and she's continuing to do this project and looking for support to do it, to expand it. The other people who are going to be talking about this are Maurice Emerson Decaul, who is a former Marine, poet, essayist, and playwright. He's now doing his MFA at Brown in playwriting. He's been published in the New York Times, Daily Beast, and a number of other publications. So we're grateful that you could join us today. And Elisabeth Sherman, who is a curator at the Whitney, working particularly with the Acquisitions Committee. She's just curated a show at the Whitney that goes into April of young painters. So I thought we would start, because some of you I know are probably deeply familiar with the work and are friends of Inbal's, but some of you are just encountering it for the first time. If we could ask Inbal to tell us how she got here to this project. I know there was a project that she did in Israel that had to do with memorials, but I think it's better if I let you talk about that, and then, when you moved here and how you decided to do this project in the U.S.
Thank you. I came here from Israel to do my master at Columbia University, and once I came here, I was really struck by the amount of monuments that you have here in America, and that all the monuments are figurative and from different periods of time. And while I'm coming from a place that lives war every day, unfortunately, and if there is a siren, you go down to the shelters, and everyone has to join the military, and when you fight, you actually look back, you see your country. While here, most of the people experience war through a screen or a newspaper, and the ones that are joining the military, fighting in another country. So that tension in terms of while our monuments in Israel are completely abstract. So that tension of war and representation of war and how people really deal with it, coming here, experience all those figurative monuments and Memorial Day as a day off in a way. Or most of the people told me, let's come and celebrate, let's do barbecue, or there are sales, or things like that, things that actually Gold Star families that I met with, and some of them are here, and thank you for coming.
Would you just stop and explain what that means, a Gold Star family?
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry. Stop me any time when there is something that you want to ask. Usually military families, and correct me if I'm wrong, usually military families are called Blue Star families, but once the member of their family is being killed, they become a Gold Star family. And some families that I met with have even 2 children serving in the military, so they can be called even Blue Star and a Gold Star family, because they lost one, but they still have another son or daughter that are still serving. But that's how it became the term Gold Star family. So coming from Israel, starting to work on this project that's called Nothing Left Here But the Hurt, that's been inspired also by a book by Brian Turner, also fought in Afghanistan and came back, amazing writer. I recommend this book. Working on this body of work that actually I went throughout the East Coast to take pictures of American monuments with different time period, combining it with sculptures from Greek mythology that speaks more about the pain and the lost and the one that are being left with the pain. And together it became like an installation, a huge installation of 81 photographs that cannot really be ignored once you are passing by. And that's what I felt was going on here. Like most of the monuments are being ignored. It's in the park, people eating lunch there, but nobody really knows what they are standing for or for what they are there. from that project, I started to think actually about the private monuments that families create and how once a family lost their beloved ones, they have to make a hard decision about the object that's been returned back from the military, what they choose to keep, what they choose to give away, what they choose to storage, because sometimes they cannot really hold for it all and they need to storage it. So how you make those decisions, and I think in a certain level, everyone that experience loss, and that's part of life, you have those kinds of decisions to make, and it's always hard and how you make them actually. And that's what this show came about those objects that they keep to keep the memory alive, and in a way how they trying to live or get forward with their life while it's the most hard things to do, I think.
So the catalog, as you'll see, has no pictures. The type is kind of small. It feels very discreet and plain. And the content is incredibly moving, powerful, emotional. And I think it stands in contrast in a big way to the work, which, I mean, if you just like look, sweep around, you know, it may seem like something else. There's the children's toys and bright primary colors and this kind of, and some pictures, you know, a sense of vitality and life, and the testimonies in the catalog are, you know, also talking about family life and relationships and fond memories, but, you know, they are shattering. And I think that they complement each other, you know, beautifully. I mean, I'm looking at this wall, though, which a lot of things are against black, and it has more of a sense of that, like a still life memorial project. But I was in here the other night, and our president of the board, Mitchie Jagarjian, an artist, was saying that she really appreciated that you let toys be toys in some of these pictures, and that, so I guess I wanted to ask you if you could maybe pick one example of one family, one situation, and talk about how you approach all of those subtle nuances of, you know, it's kind of like such a tricky thing to go in among strangers and have adapting to different families every time, different personalities, and maintaining a sensitivity.
I know nothing about them. Like, of course, I'm searching about the soldier itself, but I know nothing about the family itself. And there is no way for me to know, because it's you can just search the soldier himself. And once I'm getting to I'm driving to the house, whichever it is, and then I'm ringing the bell, and I'm always thinking about, okay, who will be on the other side? And every time I have to say, it's like it's a different family, but all of them are just amazing. And each time it's like a whole new world, and each time it's surprising that it's a completely different story and different kind of people, and nothing is the same. And Emily's here sitting with us, and she was the closest one, and also Vicky, and both of them actually from the Bronx. And I went all over, sometimes it was so far away, but then I found them here very close to us. And with Emily it was a completely, let's say, different feeling. I came, she lost Isaac, her son, in Iraq, and I came to meet her, and I met her in the Bronx at her mother's home, and she started, you know, telling, first time sitting with the family, and I interview them and ask them questions, and I hear the personal story, and of course there are a lot of tears there, and no wine, and just the tears, and it's a long conversation, and from a stranger it becomes like a family. Like I think by the end of the day they are part of my family, and this kind of meeting it will never forget. It's part of my life. And then they start, you know, some of them tell me, we just have a few things, I don't know if you'll have a lot to photograph, and I'm like, it's okay, I will come, we'll see, don't touch anything, just leave it as it is, and we'll take it from there. And once they start that conversation, they have the things that they prepare in a way, but it doesn't take long, and more things are coming out, and more things are coming out, and more things are coming out, even without them noticing or thinking about it. It just all of a sudden to have that opportunity to open the story again, all of those objects come out. And it's just beautiful process to see. With Vicky, it was she all of a sudden had the need to take out her family album and start to organize the family pictures that she didn't touch for I don't know how long. And with Emily, it was so strong because Emily and Isaac, that's the picture of the pillow back there, and she told me that she received back the pillow from the military with his t-shirts. And she actually wrapped the pillow with the t-shirts, and this is how she sleeps at night, hugging it. And of course, after a story like that, what else can it, like, it's like, that's it, I'm done, like, I can just, you know. But just meeting her and the energy and all of her energy and the way that she's keeping, you know, doing everything to keep Isaac's memory alive. And she named a post office after him and a street after him, and a car race, things that I even cannot even think about. And then you just feel even more that this story needs to pass, you know, to other, and it cannot just stay here in this bedroom. I'm coming into a home, I never know, you know, which kind of home it will be, if it's big, if I will have daylight or not. My first photo shoot, I came with so many equipment, I didn't know what to do with it after. Like, and then I decided, okay, whatever I have, just natural light, reflectors, and I'll work with that. And that's what I did with her, and all of a sudden they become my assistant. They hold my reflector, they open the curtain for me, the light is coming in, and we start that kind of a process. And it's really a very long day. And then of course I'm taking the pictures, but I'm not really allowing myself in a way to feel it all. It's just after, when I have the images and when I'm sitting with them, then I think everything really comes back at me. And also just by transcript all the interview and read that and discuss it with my husband and at home and start to understand what I'm actually having. Again, it's because there is a certain level of emotion, even though we cry together, you know, and sit down and spend the whole day. It's still, I don't think you really digest it all. It's everything is really happening after, and that's why I'm happy for the opportunity of the show to have that in the middle of the way, in a way, to start understand what I have and how can I keep going forward and finish the project in a way.
Maurice, I heard you saying that, I know you've worked with other veterans who write about their experience, and that, you know, you've worked with groups that are also encouraging veterans to write about their experience, but that it's more rare to have a testimony like this from the survivors. I wonder if you could talk about that, maybe the kind of work that you do also with veterans.
Okay. Everyone. So, I do work a lot with veterans. I'll go back a few years. I got into writing completely by accident. NYU has a writing program for veterans that's been running since 2009. And, you know, mostly Iraq and Afghan vets go to this group. We also ended up having folks coming in who had served in the Korean War and went all the way back. And what we were doing is, you know, the grad students were teaching writing, poetry and fiction, memoir, to folks who had never written about this before. And now in New York City, there are about 5 or 6 of these programs. Columbia has one. We were at Columbia together. I founded that one in Columbia because I thought we needed it. So we've got that one started, and Fordham has one, and there's some independent ones in the city. In my other life, I am a writer. Again, I write plays, and thinking about what's been happening in terms of programming nationally, shows that are looking at the veteran experience or the military experience over the last, and I've only been looking at a certain subset of American theaters, but something I realized as I've been doing this is there are a few shows that are very popular, that have been produced a lot over the last 5 years or so. But I only know of, and look, this is not to say that there are not other shows. I don't know everything that's happening in American theater, but I know of only 2 shows that are looking at something similar to this. One is a play that Trinity Rep Company in Rhode Island put on in 2006 called Boots on the Ground, and that was looking at the experiences of family members of National Guardsmen who had served in Iraq. Rhode Island has a very active Guard and Reserve component, and looking at this uniform here, I realized that I live in Providence as well, that we have a Special Forces group out of Rhode Island. So those folks go over and have been over a while. And this month, I don't remember the exact dates, but there's a theater down in North Carolina in Fayetteville called Cape Fear Regional Theater. And Fayetteville is where the Army has Fort Bragg. It's one of the biggest Army bases, right? So they're putting on a show called, what's that one called? I think it's something along the lines of Homecoming. And that again is looking at the experiences of wives mostly around the Army base. But no one, as far as I know, has done anything specifically focused on survivors. And I've been thinking about, maybe it's access, maybe it's just people haven't been able to access the survivors, maybe they just don't want to talk. But in terms of what I've seen, this is just not a story that is being made, and I'm wondering why. Because we're so focused on the vet, and we should be, but at the same time, if it is 1% or 2% or 3%, whatever the number is of people who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that's anything between 3 million and maybe 9. It's not 9, but I know it's not 9. But then when you expand it out, you're looking at millions and millions and millions and millions of other people who are affected by these wars, and those stories are not always being told. So that's something I'm very aware of now, especially since I've been doing the research for, it's a different project, but I've been doing the research looking at what has been produced over the last 5 years or so.
Let me just, since there's a photographer in the room who used to be on our board who's been working on a similar project, and since you're asking that question, why not more, and what the difficulty of access is, I'm just curious, Cynthia, if you want to comment on that. Cynthia Bittenfield.
Yeah, hi. I think, there should be more emphasis on that, because the one thing that I realized when I was working on my project, which was about a soldier who returned from Iraq with severe post-traumatic stress and ended up committing suicide, and that's an issue that I think is another huge issue that we need to shed light on as well. It's sometimes hard to get access and to find people to talk to and who really kind of want to open up. I know I wanted to do something about post-traumatic stress, but I found it a bit challenging, just to be bold enough to ask families, do you want to share that, or to approach, soldiers or veterans who have been traumatized and say, I'd like to, do a project about you.
Yeah.
So it seemed like such an invasion, and so, it was challenging, but I did, you do find your inroads, and sometimes it just takes, a few people who say yes, and then you can kind of work your way through, but I think they are important stories to tell,
Yeah.
because it's, the whole family goes to war.
Yeah.
It's not just the soldier.
Yeah.
And I think people don't quite realize what that impact is, and what the family life of, the soldier's wife, the family, or, spouse, rather, just what that entails,
Yeah.
Just by the way, there are 2 seats down here, anybody who wants to come, right in the front. So Maurice, also, could you share some of your thoughts and reactions to this body of work?
Yeah, so Inbal asked me to write a piece, and I wrote it about this one, this image. And the reason why is because, and I know that these are hand sculpted, the chaplain, correct me if I'm wrong, he handmade these, right? Yeah. But I have something similar at home. I have two little boys, and we have these kinds of, handmade, not by my hands, but handmade wooden toys at home. And it just spoke to me in a very lively way, because I could even hear the children.
Catalog.
The catalog. And I realized, Birdwell, this gentleman here, now, he was in Special Forces Group, I was a Marine, very different organizations. But when we were in Iraq in 2003, the Special Forces Group, and I don't know if he was there or not, but the Special Forces Group was on the same compound with us. And we had a lot of respect for those soldiers. So it became very, I don't know, it's not personal, but, and I connected right away, because I could think back to 2003, being in Iraq, and having the Special Forces Group literally living, within our compound, and having conversations with those soldiers, and then coming out and meeting other members of literally that same group, people I know from even undergrad. So that was, that's, I'm thinking about that one now. The camel, I have that camel. I own that camel. It's in my house. And I think we all own that camel. And the T-shirt pillow, that's a very powerful image, because you wear the T-shirt right up against your body, right? So I can only imagine what it's like to. I think I can understand it though. Why you would want to keep it close to you and sleep on it every night. I mean, it's all super powerful stuff. This though, I didn't make the connection until today, but I mean, I know people who were in that specific Special Forces group, and we were in the same compound in Iraq in 2003. That one hit me pretty hard today. Yeah. So.
Elisabeth, you can depart from this question in any way you want to, but I was just curious, as a curator, your reaction to some of the formal choices that she made, and just within the show, in the presentation, the text that she did use, and all the things that aren't here, like not using any other text except in the catalog, not having any pictures of the family members themselves, color palette presentation, if you want to address any of that.
I think I have a couple of thoughts, and my mind has been pinging in various areas, so I'll try to touch on a few of them. First is, and this is probably just because of what's going on at the museum right now, we have a show from our permanent collection opening in a few weeks, dealing with the idea of portraiture. And so I'm not involved in the show, but in the air around me a lot lately are conversations about portraiture and what is a portrait, because it would be really boring if we did a show spanning our history and you just were looking at faces. So we've really been trying to, there's a great history in all sorts of media of expanding the idea of portraiture, but I think what's so powerful about this work and the show being arranged by Soldier with the identification of the last names is that I think is the strongest takeaway for me, and And what's absent is the strongest takeaway, that these are clearly portraits, but they're portraits that can't be made anymore because the person isn't there. And so how do you document a life that isn't left anymore? I think the other thing, especially listening to you speak just now, I think I've been thinking a lot recently about two things that I see in Inbal's work. One, the idea of representation and how we're able to show the lives of others that are not lives we live, because that can be a very sensitive thing, as we all know, especially in the history of photography. You know, we want to be very careful in this day and age to not go into other communities and sort of take through the process of taking photos. And so I'm so interested in the way that Inbal, as a soldier but not an American soldier, is able to kind of go into these situations and clearly form relationships that then allow the photographs to feel like they're representations that are kind of collaborative rather than one-sided, rather than kind of forcing her own agenda on the objects, on the images. And then that dovetails into this idea of empathy and how do we, how can works of art convey empathy, especially in a day and age that feels like the legacy of irony is so much more powerful than one of empathy. I was on a talk yesterday at the Armory Fair about the future, which I found a really annoying topic. And fortunately, for my own edification, members of the panel were from a wide range of fields, and there was an editor from Wired magazine who was talking about something I had heard about totally outside of the art world, but empathy in video game design and how independent video games are really moving in this direction. And he specifically focused on this video game that a couple has made after dealing with their son having cancer and eventually dying of cancer. But what was most fascinating to me in him picking that topic and thinking about the future was how we use technology to deal with empathy. And so while the medium of photography is not a new one, I'm not still thinking about the future, but simply, you know, it sounds so wonderfully corny, I think, in this day and age, but how can art connect people? How can it create these feelings of empathy? So those are just some of my thoughts.
I'd like to invite anybody out there who has a question or a comment also to join in this. Yes.
Question. I was, you know, a little, not quite as philosophical as that, but just in the practical way that you interact with the families, how do you go about making the approach, and what kind of response do you get? I mean, obviously you have, I don't know, 10 families who agreed to participate. Were there 50 families who didn't agree to participate? I'm just curious how you find them and whether the willingness to participate is typical or atypical.
Well, it's very hard to say no to me, but you don't know me, but no, it was a very long research, and it took me about a year and a half to break this wall that you are talking about, especially when I'm not American, when I'm coming from Israel. And I was naive enough to approach the military itself and to connect me to those families. Again, coming from the state of thought, like Israel, that they have a unit that take care of, you know, the families, and they have connection, because of course social media will be the easiest one, but that's a way that I didn't want to approach because it's so private and you never know which stage the family is at, and you really want to get to a family that is ready for you and not like someone, just because it's social media or someone knows them. So it took me a while to investigate and through different organizations. And then there was one that says yes, Maggie. She is the wife of Kyle Osborne, and she said yes, and she said, yeah, please come, and I had the best experience with her because she gave me the whole weekend, and she has the huge house and natural light, like everything that I could ask for. And so once I met with her, she started to introduce me to other families, and other families introduced me to other, of course. Emily here did a great job to introduce me to all people that she knows, and then on the Vietnam War Memorial, I met Vicky there. Someone else introduced me to her. So it's going to a lot of fairs and approaching a lot of organizations, and keep in touch with the families, of course, that become part of my life, and just keep approaching different ways and different, to think about different things, speaking about, with formal veterans, my students. Do you know anyone? Just asking all the time, everyone that I see, and just take it from there. But it was a long process. But then once I'm approaching a family, nobody really said no. They are very open to it, and they're willing to talk about it, and they want to do it because it is important, and they want to share it. And even for Maggie, when I met with her, she's really young. They were, just got married. They don't have any children. She just began her life, and she feels obligated also to keep, talking about Kyle, while she knows that she will get married and she will have children with someone else. But she really wants, to keep the memory of Kyle alive. And she told me that at some point she's thinking to, whatever she has, to just pass to his mother, but she's not ready yet. But at some point, like, to give it back to his mother. And so I think once you met with the family and talk to them and tell them what the project is about and what are your intentions, they are more than open to it.
Well,
Inbal, I was wondering, you were talking about how the families become part of your family, or you feel, if I understood you. And I was wondering if there comes a point where this just becomes overwhelming to you emotionally, if you're taking all of this in, and if it does, how you deal with that or limit it?
It's a good question. It is overwhelming, and as I said, it always starts from the interview, to hear the story first and to get to know each other, because we are strangers in the beginning of the day. But then, I spend the day, as I told Alan before, it is overwhelming in terms of like just digest everything. But always my children and both of my children, one is 7 months and one is 3.5, and my husband are always coming with me to those trips, because at the end of the day I need to see them also. And they're always waiting for me outside, and then they can introduce each other and meet each other, and that's another way for them to become part of the family. And when Ori, I think the first shoot with Ori was when he was 8 weeks, so I even like needed to breastfeed and things like that. But then like just going back to my own family and share the story with them and see them, I think that's the support that I'm getting back for me to be able to keep going and to keep working on this project and understand how important it is. But without them, I don't know how I would overcome this overwhelm.
I feel like it's part of our culture. Like we come from this place where, when you asked before about, in the US nobody talks about the family, so an initial part of the conversation is about the families, and we all grew up knowing people who lost children and husbands in war. So it's because Israel is so small, because we do have a special unit that takes care of the families. It's part of our upbringing and it's part of our DNA maybe. Even if specifically we haven't lost a father or a brother, right, or a child. And I think that it's also really interesting to look at this as an outsider, because you bring your sensibilities from Israel and from the place you grew up and the specific culture, and then you come here and you say, oh, there's similarities, but then it's different, right? And your struggles to figure out how to meet the families and how to they become your family, and this, you know, assimilation in a way, but then you are a foreigner. And so that is, and I think that's an interesting thing to think about also in the terms of the artist as an outsider, which is a powerful place to be in.
When I actually meet with the family, one of the questions that I'm asking is if the members of the military, of the group of the soldier that served with him, that fought with him, come back and pay their respect, meet with them, were they in the funeral? Again, because Israel is so small, if a soldier is being killed, everyone will be there, like the whole unit will be there. And his officer will be there, and they will share throughout the 7 days, the Shiva, they will share stories and they will tell the families every detail that they need to know about him, and like whatever, even ate a minute before. And while here, they don't see them. And it can take even years that they will call back, because first of all, they fight in another country, they can't really come to the funeral. And those that come need to leave again very fast, and they are not in the same city, not even the same state, completely different. Like the distance here, how big this country is also something that I was shocked in terms of like, it is hard to reach the family, even if you want to. So maybe by email or a phone call, but the personal connection that we really have, it's something that cannot really physically happen here because of the size of it.
Libby?
I guess I just kind of had a question for Elisabeth and Maurice. I was thinking a lot about this idea of collective history and personal history, and it seems like so much of what everyone is talking about is about that. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts of how this work kind of bridges those two types of histories.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is, again, I'll go back to this this uniform here. This is a very private space. In order to see this uniform, one would have to be invited into this space, right? So in that way, you know, it's very sequestered and personal. But seeing it in a space like this, and also reading the backstory, it makes, well, for me, it makes the war big and small at the same time. Because I can understand it on a big macro scale. You know, we're fighting these two wars, and we're still sort of in Iraq, but Iraq and Afghanistan and what that means. But then, you know, you're seeing the individual and the cost, the individual cost of those actions. And yeah, so I think what it allows us to do is look into the lives of the people who are left behind. I mean, we call them survivors, so the people who are left behind. And by doing that, one can empathize, because, you know, again, the toys, I can see my kids playing with these toys. So it expands the notion of, I don't know, what's personal, what's not, what's private, what's not. It allows us into the other person's most private places. I think that's one of the things that's working exceptionally well. That's one of the very powerful modes that this work is working in.
I think I'd say this probably something almost exactly the same, but a little bit differently. I was thinking about issues of legibility, what's legible to who. Totally different work. I was talking about this same thing this morning, talking about this painter, Njideka Akunile-Crosby, who is a Nigerian woman who now lives in the United States, and in her work very intentionally brings together things that are specific Nigerian references and specific American references. And what she's interested in is how the viewer, there are very few viewers who can read all the references. She's interested in that there's this variability of legibility to the viewer, and I feel that same thing, especially listening to you, in that what's legible to me as a non-veteran, as someone who has almost no interaction with the military, is going to be very different. Things are going to speak, or not as a parent, or not, you know, so I look at certain things and some are very familiar to me, some are very foreign to me. So some feel very universal, whether it's a watch or a notebook, something that we all interact with on a day-to-day basis, and then some I don't understand without explanation, maybe the gold and the blue stars in the boxes back there, or the camel. Before Inbal explained those to me, the power of those symbols didn't read. And so I find those kinds of expansions and contractions of universal and personal in the work quite interesting.
And then I think also the approach speaks to the collective in that it's concentrating on objects and the presentation of objects as museums do. But the content within those pictures, I mean, there's a lot of text actually in the images, but there's a lot of specific personal content, and then that speaks to personal history. It's interesting to me that I think overall it's about loss, memory, family, intimate relationships, rather than war and the politics of war. And I'm curious, you know, in terms of the politics.
Well, I didn't want to speak about the politics side of it because I'm not American, and I can't really. I don't think that I'm in that position to, you know, make an opinion. I can't even vote, so right. So I can't really. But for me, it was much more interesting to meet with the families, to see how they remember, how they actually cope with the loss, how a culture cope with the loss, and how they deal with it, and how they keep the memory. And that's my interest in all my bodies of work. I did also residency in Northern Ireland, another country that deals with conflict and politics. And the same was with them. It was more to meet with the people and like understand how they experience and how they really live their life. How you actually, when you experience war, how can you keep live in a way? How you keep, you know, growing and develop, or keep thoughts in different ways when there is so much pain and there is so much loss. And so that is my main interest, the place and the culture and how they deal with it, and less about the politics and who's right or who's wrong or who will win or who's losing.
Yes?
Yeah, that's interesting because I don't find this political at all, and I think what Inbal has done is fabulous, because what people have to realize is that there's the casualty and then there's a survivor, as we talked about, and the survivor has to deal with so much. I'm making a documentary about people going back to battlefields to see where their loved ones fought and everything, and they said the same thing about that. It's not political, it's about people, it's about the person, and I think that's extraordinary what she's done, and I find the photographs fascinating, how you have had that time with the people that's so precious, to speak with them and get their emotions. I mean, I had a brother who died when he was 25, and he wasn't in the military, but I know the objects and the things that throughout my life and to this age now that reminded me of him, and you know, and we're going to work together too. I have an uncle who died in World War II, was a Medal of Honor recipient, and these objects and memories and people talking about that person is just so personal and not political. It's just very personal. And, I bravo to you, because this work is extraordinary, and
Yes.
I wanted to say that I agree with you and disagree because as a matter of fact, what I feel from the show obviously is that a very personal and delicate way to deal with grief and loss and memory and all of those things that follow after one loses a beloved one. But at the same time, I feel like, yes, these are all have history and all resonate of memory and like souvenirs and like leftovers of a deceased person and things that are in moments that are crucial for the person who's saving them. But at the same time, I think that there's no one object or even image that has that strong story of war and what war does to lives and like the people that has to deal with the fact of how a country leads and how a country wants to be the empire and how a country, it doesn't matter where, whether it's here or anywhere else, like I think it's attached to a very heavy weight story of politics, and even the chairs that we sit on has strong attachments to politics, and it's not politic in the straightforward, it's like an undertone that exists in the images.
In the back.
Sort of visible back here, but I was struck when I first met you and we talked about your work, and I'm struck more now by seeing the finished work and reading the stories of the people, by something that you did that is very rare. You absolutely met these people as who they were, and you interjected no opinions, nothing of yourself except your empathy. And because of that, to me, the work is much more potent because it characterizes each family and each individual set of losses as uniquely their own. It's not yours. It's your project and it's your thought, but you are seeing the people through your work and through their own words. You didn't edit. That's very hard to do.
Yeah, just narrow it down a little bit.
Yeah. But the voice of the person is coming through, and that it's really remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how to respond to what you were saying, but I think, and I agree with you, Joe, it's that, I mean, it's interesting, it's a very charged subject area, and you're from a very politicized place.
But I think because I'm from Israel and because I'm coming from a very political place, I mean, I had enough from politics. I had more than enough of my share, and I just let us live. That's it. That's like, I'm not interested in that.
And then I also would just say, just like choices as an artist of what you're going to deal with and what you're not going to deal with. I've talked to other Israeli artists who talk about how, like anything they see that is politically direct is just verging on cliche because there's so much that they see that is political work in their midst addressing their conflict, and that it's hard to do anything fresh in that arena. Not that you can't, but yeah. So I understand that fatigue with that kind of more directly political approach as well. And then, I'm also thinking about this being the first stop. Along what path? How is this work going to live with its catalog? What will be the next venue? What kind of venue do you want? But, I'm thinking throughout this conversation about what a particularly politically charged year it is in the US, and like unparalleled in a certain way with what's going on in the elections and the Supreme Court and all of that's going to be coming up. And whether this moves through that landscape in some way at the same time will be interesting to see.
Well, it's interesting to think about the difference in how there is this stereotype of Israeli artists making political art, and every time you meet, and I mean, we had the same conversation, like what's your relationship to that? How do you identify yourself as an Israeli artist? And how do you deal with those expectations? Meanwhile, American artists living in arguably equally as charged of a political environment are almost allergic to politics right now. And personally, I'm so hungry for more young artists to be making political work at any point on the spectrum, simply because what else is there to talk about at the moment? And so I think I really appreciate the generosity of the politics in the work, because I would argue whether or not your own I don't think your own politics are legible. I don't think we can understand how you feel about the U.S. military, about our own occupation and, of other countries, but it's the beginning of a conversation, and that, to me, I think is the most important thing, is forcing people to dialogue with each other about these things, because I can tell you from doing nothing but being in the art world the last 5 days, people are not having these conversations, and there should not be anything else we're talking about at the moment, so.
Yeah, I just did an interview, and one of the questions I was asked was about my work and is it political. I said my intent is not for it to be that, but I can't control the way that it is received. So even with this work, it's not the intent, but being in the space, being in the country in a time when we've been at war for, I don't know, what year is it, 16? Going on 15 years, yeah. It's hard to not make some of those connections if one wants to go down that route. So.
But I think the problem is that you have to start with these families and where they're coming from.
Yeah.
And we liberal, New Yorkers might have some opinion about the military or about these actions, but I don't know that someone who sent their kid off to fight and lost a child or a husband feels the same way about it, and they may have strong feelings wanting to validate or justify what happened, and I think it would be really condescending and would shatter any trust that you would have with these families if you tried to tell some other story besides the story that the family wants to tell themselves.
But
that's why I think when we can look at this and say, it screams out like why, why is all this happening? We can react that way, but I think the relationship that Inbal has with these individuals, I don't think you can go there.
But I think that's what I was saying. I think that's the strength of the work, is that I imagine that of the 50 people sitting in this room, each of our own, if we were to take one of these images to illustrate our own op-ed, the op-ed would read 50 different ways. And so just the generosity of offering up a space for that conversation, even if the reactions all come from our individual. It's kind of back to that personal and universal, like we can universally understand the pain of the images, but we each personally use that image for a different political output.